The banking industry is surrounded by so many conspiracies that sometimes it's quite difficult to separate facts from the fictions. Starting from the Rothschild banking dynasty to J.P. Morgan, it's if the Rothschild banking empire has shrunk dramatically in the recent decades, J.P. Morgan's banking empire only expanded to the point as the 2019 it has $3 trillion in the asset under the management, while its investments and the corporative arm holds $25.45 trillion in asset under custody. In fact, it was J.P. Morgan himself who pushed the government to create the Federal Reserve, the center of all modern conspirations. For over the 100 years, J.P. Morgan has been in the center of the American banking. In this video, we're going to look at how J.P. Morgan created the world's largest bank and how he had ended up also convincing the government to create the Fed. It also started in the 1837 in Hartford, Connecticut, where John Pythron Morgan was born. John joined the banking businesses just when he hit 20. After coming back from Europe in the 1857, following his father's footsteps, his father's J.S. Morgan was already established the merchant banking firm. Peabody Morgan corporations. Back when the United States wasn't the superpower that is today, it was more like the emerging market. So the Europeans were investing heavily in the United States since returns were quite high, especially in the railroads. It was like the investing of that time. Everyone thought that the railroads are the future and no one would dare to miss the opportunity. But Morgan was smart enough not to invest his money because he knew that it was turning into the bubble and everything would crash at any moment as well. As we will later see in this video, however, that didn't stop him from the funneling European investments through American companies into the railroads. He even got personally involved in the development and management of the railroads across the nations. Morgan was a big believer in the big corporations because they enable economics of scales and make them more competitive. So his vision was to always merge multiple small businesses and turn them into the conglomerate. In the 1890s, he took control of the G.S. Morgan Corporation. His vision was to buy Carnegie steel businesses and manage it to the several other steel, coal, mining, and shipping firms. And from the United States Steel Corporation, it became the first billion-dollar company in the world, with the market capitalization of $1.4 billion. With economics of scales, they reduced their costs and started competing globally against Europeans. His influence was beyond steel and railroads, although these two were the best two industries of that time. He also played an important role and helped to merge Edison Electric with these competitors that ended up becoming General Electric. His vision was always bigger than the company, the bigger economics of the scale it can achieve. He also helped to create AT&T and multiple other companies. It seems like it was J.P. Morgan who wrote the idea of the giant corporations in the United States. But that's exactly what made J.P. Morgan one of the most powerful banking houses of the world in the 20th century. Morgan recognized the business's structure and management to return them to the profitability. His reputation as the banker also helped bring investors to on abroad to the businesses that he took over. However, not everything was sunshine and rainbows. Remember the crisis I told you about in the beginning? Well, after the multiple decades of dramatic growth, the bubble finally burst and the stock market crashed like it always does. It ripped the American economy. Even the major banks were on the verge of bankruptcy. The banks tried to get their loans back, but the firms simply weren't able to pay, and the United States didn't have the central bank at that time to rescue them. So Morgan stepped in to save the economy. He pledged a large sum of his own money and convinced other major New York bankers to do the same. If it wasn't for him, the crisis would have deepened. But it also illustrated the vast influence of the single banker on the entire American economy. That was a clear sign for the government to step in and take over the money supply. What would happen if another crisis would hit? Relying on the rich guys in New York isn't always the best of the options. That's when the US decided to create the central bank. In the 1913, the Federal Reserve was born, just a few months after JP Morgan passed away. But that didn't stop JP Morgan company from the growing even bigger. It played important role in the World War One. However, when war came and financial crisis hit the world again. The Great Depression was lasted among 10 years, and Congress took any measures to save the economy, and part of it was passed the Banking Act in the 1933 that separated the commercial banks from investment banks, that forced the JP Morgan corporations to break up. However, the JP Morgan to become as big as the powerful as it's today, it has to merge with the multiple or other banks through the century. The most notable of them, probably Chase Manhattan Bank, that was already the merger of the two other big banks, Chase National Banks and Bank of the Manhattan company that was founded back in the 1799, one of the oldest financial institutions in the history of the United States. Another bank that also creating foreign competitions was the Chemical Banks Corporations. The name sounds quite unusual for a bank. It was initially a chemical manufacturing company back when it was founded in the 1823. However, just a year after that, it got into the banking sector. After more than a century, in the 1980s and 1990s, it was at the front of the industry. Remember Chase Manhattan Bank? Despite its success, it was extremely weakened by the real estate collapse, so it merged with chemical banks in the 1996 and became the biggest bank in the entire nation. The merger of the biggest banks of the America didn't stop there. The company's competition was fierce. And Chase Manhattan Bank had to find ways to compete with the Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley. So in December 2000, the two giant financial institutions merged Chase Manhattan and JP Morgan to become the largest bank in America, JP Morgan Chase Corporations. It seems like there would be the end of the emergence to these banks would finally stop expanding. However, that wasn't the case. In 2004, JP Morgan pushed Chicago's based bank one corporations of the $58 billion in the stocks, bringing the board Jamie Dimon, who would end up becoming the CEO and take the company on to where it's now. Despite the fact that the JP Morgan was powerful enough to save the nation from the panic of the 1907, the bank in its current structure is a result of the combination of the several large US banks. Chase Manhattan Bank, Bank One, Bears Stearns, Washington Mutual, Chemical Bank, Manufacturing, Hanover, First Chicago Bank, National Bank of Detroit, Texas Commerce Banks, Provident Financial, Great Western Banks. Like in the 1907, the world was hit by another crisis in 2008. The stock market crashed again, but this time the crisis was much bigger. Companies went bankrupt one after another, including the conglomerates such as the Lehman Brothers. The fifth largest bank in the US, Bear Stearns also lost almost half, 47% of its value, and it was on the verge of the bankruptcy. Unlike 1907, this time there was the central bank Federal Reserve to save the economy, and JP Morgan Chase took full advantage of that. To prevent the collapse of such a giant bank, the government rescued Bear Stearns by lending 29 billion to JP Morgan Chase to buy the firm. They tried to purchase banks for around $230 million, valuing each share at only $2 when it was valued above the $100 just before the crisis. But it didn't work out, so they ended up paying $10 a share. And JP Morgan comes out and over the crisis only stronger and bigger. JP Morgan isn't without controversies. They were involved in the multiple scandals. They paid over $2 billion in the fines and legal settlements for their role in the financial Enroll Corporation found a fraudulent securities. In fact, they also ended up paying another $2.2 billion to settle off the lawsuit filed by the Enroll investors. The number of the controversies and lawsuits that it went through it is beyond that we can possibly cover in this video. But JP Morgan Chase is probably exactly how the JP Morgan himself envisaged the company. He was a big supporter of the mergers, and the company consistently merged or purchased another banks to where they are today. And now it's your turn. What do you think? Should banks be allowed to keep merging and get bigger, or government should intervene and limit banks? Let me know down in the comments below. As always, hit that like button. Thanks for watching, and I see you in the next one.